it can satisfy the passion for self-renunciation. Let me look up what that means. Pardon me. Part 2, the desire for substitutes. There's a fundamental difference between the appeal of a mass movement and the appeal of a practical organization. A practical organization offers opportunities for self-advancement, and its appeal is mainly to self-interest. On the other hand, a mass movement, particularly in its active revivalist phase, appeals not to those intent on bolstering and advancing a cherished self, but to those who crave to be rid of an unwanted self. A mass movement attracts and holds a following not because it can satisfy the desire for self-advancement, but because it can satisfy the passion for self-renunciation. People who see their lives as irremediably spoiled cannot find a worthwhile purpose in self-advancement. The prospect of an individual career cannot stir them to a mighty effort, nor can it evoke in them faith and single-minded dedication. They look on self-interest as something tainted and evil, something unclean and unlucky. Anything undertaken under the auspices of the self seems to them foredoomed. Nothing that has its roots and reasons in the self can be good and noble. Their innermost cravings is for a new life, a rebirth, or failing this, a chance to acquire new elements of pride, confidence, hope, a sense of purpose and worth by an identification with a holy cause. An active mass movement offers them opportunities for both. If they join the movement as full converts, they are reborn to a new life in its close-knit collective body. Or if attracted as sympathizers, they find elements of pride, confidence, and purpose by identifying themselves with the efforts, achievements, and prospects of the movement. To the frustrated, a mass movement offers substitutes either for the whole self or for the element which make life bearable and which they cannot evoke out of their individual resources. It is true that among the early adherents of a mass movement there are also adventurers who join in the hope that the movement will give a spin to their wheel of fortune and whirl them to fame and power. On the other hand, a degree of selfless dedication is sometimes displayed by those who join corporations, orthodox political parties, and other practical organizations. Still, the fact remains that a practical concern cannot endure unless it can appeal to and satisfy self-interest, while the vigor and growth of a rising mass movement depends on its capacity to evoke and satisfy the passion for self-renunciation. When a mass movement begins to attract people who are interested in their individual careers, it is a sign that it has passed its vigorous stage, that it is no longer engaged in moldering a new world, but in possessing and preserving the present. It creates then to be a movement and becomes an enterprise. According to Hitler, the more posts and offices a movement has to hand out, the more inferior stuff it will attract. And in the end, these political hangers-on overwhelm a successful party in such a number that the honest fighter of former days no longer recognizes the old movement. When this happens, the mission of such a movement is done for. Nice music. The nature of the complete substitute offered by conversion is discussed in the chapters on self-sacrifice and united action in Part 3. Here we shall deal with the partial substitute. 8. Faith in holy cause is to considerable extent a substitute for the lost faith in ourselves. 9. The less justified a man is in claiming excellence for his own self, in Chapter 9, the less justified a man is in claiming excellence for his own self, the more ready is he to claim all excellence for his nation, his religion, his race, or his holy cause. In Chapter 10, we discuss a man is likely to mind his own business when it is worth minding. When it is not, he takes his mind off his own meaningless affairs by minding other people's business. This minding of other people's business expresses itself in gossip, snooping, and meddling, and also in feverish interest in communal, national, and racial affairs. In running away from ourselves, we either fall on our neighbor's shoulder or fly at his throat. 11. The burning conviction that we have a holy duty toward others is often a way of attracting our drowning selves to a passing raft. What looks like giving a hand is often a holding on for dear life. Take away our holy duties, and you leave our lives puny and meaningless. There is no doubt that in exchange a self-centered for a selfless life, we gain enormously in self-esteem. The vanity of the selfless, even those who practice utmost humility, is boundless. One of the most potent attractions of a mass movement is its offering of a substitute for individual hope. In 12, this attraction is particularly effective in a society imbued with the idea of progress. For in the conception of progress, tomorrow looms large, and the frustration resulting from having nothing to look forward to is the more poignant. Hermann Rosching says of pre-Hitlerian Germany that the feeling of having come to the end of all things was one of the worst troubles we endured after the lost war. In a modern society, people can live without hope only when kept dazed and out of breath by incessant hustling. The despair brought by unemployment comes not only from the threat of destitution, but from the sudden view of a vast nothingness ahead. The unemployed are more likely to follow the peddlers of hope than the handers out of relief. Mass movements are usually accused of doping their followers with hope of the future, while cheating them of the enjoyment of the present. Yet to the frustrated, the present is irredeemably spoiled. Comforts and pleasures cannot make it whole. No real content or comfort can ever arise in the minds but from hope. 13. When our individual interests and prospects do not seem worth living for, we are in desperate need of something. We are in desperate need of something apart from us to live for. All forms of dedication, devotion, loyalty, and self-surrender are in essence a desperate clinging to something which might give worth and meaning to our futile, spoiled life. Hence the embracing of a substitute will necessarily be passionate and extreme. We can have qualified confidence in ourselves, but the faith we have in our nation, religion, race, or holy cause has to be extravagant and uncompromising. A substitute embraced in moderation cannot supplement and efface the self we want to forget. We cannot be sure that we have something worth living for unless we are ready to die for it. This readiness to die is evidence to ourselves and others that what we had to take as a substitute for an irrevocably missed our spoiled first choice is indeed the best there ever was. 3. The interchangeability of mass movements. When people are ripe for a mass movement, they are usually ripe for any effective movement, and not solely for one with a particular doctrine or program. In pre-Hitlerian Germany, it was often a toss-up whether a restless youth would join the communists or the Nazis. In the overcrowded Pale of Tsarist Russia, the simmering Jewish population was ripe both for revolution and Zionism. In the same family, one member would join the revolutionaries and the other the Zionists. Dr. Chaim Weizmann quotes a saying of his mother in those days: "Whatever happens, I shall be well off. If Shmuel, the revolutionary son, is right, we shall all be happy in Russia. And if Chaim, the Zionist, is right, then I shall go live in Palestine." This receptivity to all movements does not always cease even after the potential true believer has become the ardent convert of a specific movement. Where mass movements are the violent competition with each other, there are not infrequent instances of converts, even the most zealous, shifting their allegiances from one to the other. A Saul turning into Paul is neither a rarity nor a miracle. In our day, each proselytizing mass movement seems to regard the zealous adherents of its antagonist as its own potential converts. Hitler looks on the German communists as potential National Socialists. The Piet Nourgis Social Democrat and the trade union boss will never make a National Socialist, but the communist always will. Quote, Captain Rome boasted that he could turn the reddish communist into a glowing nationalist in 4 weeks. On the other hand, Karl Rodak looked on the Nazi brown shirts essay as a reserve for future communist recruits. Since all mass movements draw their adherents from the same types of humanity and appeal to the same types of mind, it follows that A. All mass movements are competitive, and the gain of one of its adherents is the loss of all the others. B. All mass movements are interchangeable. One mass movement readily transforms itself into another. A religious movement may develop into a social revolution or a nationalist movement, a social revolution into a militant nationalism, or a religious movement, a nationalist movement into a social revolution or religious movement. It is rare for a mass movement to be wholly of one character. Usually it displays some facets of other types of movements, and sometimes it is 2 or 3 movements in one. The exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt was a slave revolt, a religious movement, and a nationalist movement. The militant nationalism of the Japanese is essentially religious. The French Revolution was a new religion. It had its dogma, its sacred principles of the revolution, liberté, I can't pronounce that, liberté, E-G-A-L-I-T-E. It had its own form of worship, an adaptation of the Catholic ceremonial, which was celebrated in connection with civic fitness. It had its saints, the heroes and martyrs of liberty. At the same time, the French Revolution was also a nationalist movement. The Legislative Assembly decreed in 1792 that altars should be raised everywhere bearing the inscription, "The citizen is born, lives and dies for le parti." The religious movement of the Reformation had a revolutionary aspect which expressed itself in peasant uprisings and were also nationalist movements. Said Luther, "In the eyes of the Italians, we Germans are merely low Teutonic swine. They exploit us like charlatans and suck the country to the marrow. Wake up, Germany!" The religious character of the Bolshevik and Nazi revolutions is generally recognized. The hammer and sickle and swastika are in a class with the cross. The ceremonial of their parades is the ceremonial of a religious procession. They have articles of faith, saints, martyrs, and holy sepulchres. The Bolshevik and Nazi revolutionaries are full-blown nationalist movements. Revolutions are full-blown nationalist movements. The Nazi Revolution had been so from the beginning, while the nationalism of the Bolsheviks was a late development. Zionism is a nationalist movement and a social revolution. To the Orthodox Jew, it is also a religious movement. Irish nationalism has deep religious tinge. The present mass movement in Asia are both nationalist and revolutionary. Problem 16. The problem of stopping a mass movement is often a matter of substituting one movement for another. A social revolution can be stopped by promoting a religious or nationalist movement. Thus, in countries where Catholicism has recaptured its mass movement spirit, it contracts the spread of communism. In Japan, it was nationalism that canalized all movements of social protest. In our South, the movement of racial solidarity acts as a preventive of social upheaval. A similar situation may be observed among the French in Canada and the Boers in South Africa. This method of stopping one movement by substituting another for it is not always without danger, and it does not usually come cheap. It is well for those who hug the present and want to preserve it, as it is not to play with the mass movements. But always fares ill with the present when a genuine mass movement is on the march. In pre-war Italy and Germany, practical businessmen acted in an entirely logical manner when they encouraged the fascist and Nazi movement in order to stop communism. But in doing so, these practical and logical people promoted their own liquidation. There are other safer substitutes for a mass movement. In general, any arrangement which either discourages atomistic individualism or facilities of self-forgetting or offers chances for action and new beginnings tends to counteract the rise and spread of mass movements. These subjects are dealt with in later chapters. Here we shall touch upon the curious substitutes for mass movements, namely migration. Emigration offers some of the things the frustrated hope to find when they join a mass movement, namely change and a chance for a new beginning. The same types who swell the ranks of a rising mass movement are also likely to avail themselves of chance to emigrate. Thus, migration can serve as a substitute for a mass movement. It is plausible, for instance, that had the United States and the British Empire welcomed mass migration from Europe after the First World War, there might have been neither a fascist nor a Nazi revolution. In this country, free and easy migration over the vast continent contributed to our social stability. However, because of the quality of their human material, mass migrations are fertile ground for the rise of genuine mass movements. It is sometimes difficult to tell where a mass migration ends and a mass movement begins, and which came first. The migration of the Hebrews from Egypt developed into a religious nationalist movement. The migration of the barbarians in the declining days of the Roman Empire were more than mere shifts of population. The indications that the barbarians were relatively few in number, but once they invaded a country, they were joined by the oppressed and dissatisfied in all walks of life. Quote, "It was a social revolution started en masse by a superficial foreign conquest." End of quote. Every mass movement is a sense of migration, a movement toward a promised land. When a feasible and expedient and actual migration takes place, this happens in the case of the Puritans, and the Baptists, Mormons, Jacobins, and Zionists. Migration in the mass strengthens the spirit and unity of a movement, and whether in the form of foreign conquest, crusade, pilgrimage, or settlement of a new land, it is practiced by the most active mass movements. This deals with the peculiarities common to all mass movements, be they religious movements, social revolutions, or nationalist movements. It does not maintain that all movements are identical, but that they share certain essential characteristics which give them a family likeness. All mass movements generate in their adherents a readiness to die and a proclivity for united action. All of them, irrespective of the doctrine they preach and the program they project, breed fanaticism, enthusiasm, fervent hope, hatred, and intolerance. All of them are capable of releasing a powerful flow of activity in certain departments of life. All of them demand blind faith and single-hearted allegiance. All movements, however different in doctrine, our aspiration draw their early adherents from the same types of humanity. They all appeal to the same types of mind. Though there are obvious differences between the fanatical Christian, the fanatical Mohammedan, the fanatical nationalist, the fanatical communist, and the fanatical Nazi, it is not true that the fanaticism which animates them may be viewed and treated as one. The same is true of the force which drives on to expansion and the world domination. There is a certain uniformity in all types